I want to start and encourage people to please go fill out that poll, and let's go. So the idea behind this was to really have a dinner table conversation among us all, because we all have a lot of experience, each of us, and different perspectives, and we felt that the normal panel situation is just boring to go to and boring to listen to. It's boring to give and boring to listen to. So we are really hoping to have a lot of audience participation. So please use that chat column and make your comments in there. And sometimes if you want to speak, you can request and we'll try to let you into the conversation. We'll see how that works. So I thought that we would, this session is being recorded like all the other ones. So make sure that that you do know that, in case it makes you anxious. so that's going to happen. Let's start with, we'll make a round of introductions, and I will go. Oh, I see here, there's check the event chat, polls, people, and Q&A tabs. Discover other upcoming sessions. Try the networking function, which I did one time today, and send direct messages to other participants. I did that today. I would encourage you guys also, though, as I say, to chat among ourselves. We're all here. So let me introduce myself. 21 years ago, I co-founded Zipcar. And as I look at my colleagues, I would say that all those years ago, what was happening in Europe was the inspiration, but what Zipcar did was we totally transformed the technology piece of it. So we didn't have lock boxes and with keys in it. We didn't have phone and paper reservations. We really applied wireless technology and internet, because that was 2000 and now it existed. Since then, that's when I fell in love with transportation. I realized it's the center of the universe, my complete passion. I don't know why everyone doesn't work in it. It's the most important thing socially, and from a climate perspective and from an equity perspective, it's just like the best thing. Since then, I've done several other transport sharing startups. I did a real ride sharing startup for 2 years in the US, didn't work, and nothing has worked in the US so far. Then I moved to Paris and I did a peer-to-peer car sharing company where there were 9 startups simultaneously. And after a few years, we were like number 3 and we're not number 1. And then we merged with Drivey, that is number 1 and succeeded, and most of the others did not succeed. Then most recently, I co-founded NUMO, the New Urban Mobility Alliance, my first nonprofit, because as you can see, I'm still deeply, deeply passionate in this. Oh, and I did another startup called Venium, which is vehicle network management. So I am so interested in this conversation, and I'm so happy to be meeting with people. So let me pass this over to Rebecca. Why are you here? Why are you going to be a great conversationalist to have next to me?
Thanks. Well, I think my path to working in mobility is similar to yours, based on a passion and a desire to help create a sustainable future, but one that's not based on ideology, kind of thing. I studied environmental science in the US, and so I think I was one of those kind of environmental radicals. I remember being called radical in a discussion about the mayor's climate action plan in Kansas City. And I realized, even though they're quite commonplace ideas here in Europe, but I realized with radical ideas, it's really hard to motivate the majority of the population to behave and travel sustainably. It's got to be easy and effortless. People don't have to think about it. It should be convenient, flexible, and that's why I decided to go into urban planning and then transport planning, is because I want to make sustainable lifestyles and sustainable travel behavior easy, and car-free lifestyles easy.
I just want to note that I'm giving the closing keynote tomorrow, and one of my major points is we spent the last 100 years making cars the easy and convenient choice. Personal car ownership. We made personal car ownership the easy, convenient choice.
Yeah. And when I decided to move to Europe, it was 14 years ago now, almost hard to believe. I realized I didn't realize in what kind of a prison I was living in, a transport prison. And here I have the absolute freedom of choice, and I can live car-free, and I've been lucky enough to make that my career as well, for the city of Bremen in northern Germany, where I am responsible for car sharing, implementing Bremen's car sharing action plan. I plan mobility hubs and work on integrating car sharing into new housing developments. And I get to do that on a local scale. The city of Bremen, I have 8 years of experience doing that now, as well as work on European policies with with incredible project partners throughout Belgium, the Netherlands, that's how I met Ananda, Norway, Sweden, the UK. So yeah, a lot of passion behind that. Ananda, since we've known each other for quite a while, and I know why you're here, do you want to let the audience know why you're here?
Sure. I think we share the same passion for sure. I mean, I work in transportation, but I always say I'm a real nerd. You can wake me up for a good discussion about car sharing in the middle of the night, and I will still have an engaged conversation with you. So yes, and I've also lived most of my adult life car free, with the exception of 1 year. So I think I've also been started car sharing with Greenwheels in 2008 or something like that. I can't exactly remember. And it's over 7 years that I work in as an independent consultant. And one of the jobs I work on, and today I'm here, is for the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands, where I work on shared mobility in mobility as a service team and mobility as a service program. And I know Andrew, the next one, as one of the signers of the first Green Deal, which I set up, and I worked with all the field of car sharing for 3.5 years. So over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Ananda. Hi, everybody. I actually know a few names if I look at the people. Nice to see you digitally. Thanks for being here, Robin, also. My name is Andrew. I'm responsible for Greenwheels. Maybe some of you know it. I know Ananda knows it from 2008. But it's a station-based car sharing service, and we're active in the Netherlands and in Germany. In the Netherlands, we're quite well known. Exist now for 26 years, so that's quite a while. And yeah, I'm at the table to basically provide my input as a car sharing provider as to how I think we can scale car sharing in the next phase, let's say. And looking forward to the discussions. And also, if like Robin already mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat and contact me or us.
So Rebecca, can you reveal for us what happened with the poll and who's come to our dinner party?
Yes. Hold on, I can.
I've abdicated technical responsibilities.
Sorry. I'm supposedly showing results. Am I showing results now? Can we get some feedback from the chat, please? Are you seeing the results of the polls? Have you been able to fill out the polls in the chat? Did that work? Showing results. Yes, it worked. Okay, thanks, Jan Jadler. It should be.
Where would we see it? Show results. Oh my God, it's a different tab.
Which I've clicked like 3 times already. Now?
Okay, I don't see it, but while Daniel is figuring that out.
It's like the old cellular phone commercial. Can you hear me now? It's like, can you see the poll results now?
Okay. Well, sadly, because I would like to know who you are, let's start while we're waiting for that to happen. We've decided that to set the dinner table, let's talk about what are the, here we are, 2021, and this is a different coming out of a pandemic in the middle of a whole new context. So what has changed over the last 20 years? And while we were discussing this, I guess I'll say my first thing that has changed dramatically from, in my opinion, is when I launched Zipcar in, as I said, 2000. there were no shared micromobility services. There were no Uber and Lyft apps. There was none of that stuff. So when I would be asked, what is car sharing's major competitor? It really was the personal car ownership was the major competitor. And today, when we're as people are moving, as we hope, into a multimodal situation, I want to say they're not even competitors, but there are use cases that can be picked off by other modes, which I'm still feeling great about. But I feel like that is a major difference between then and now.
I think there are a lot of differences. If I can add to that, and one of them, you mentioned it. I think there is much more competition now. We've seen players coming out from different perspectives, OEMs getting onto the bandwagon, and also sometimes getting off the bandwagon again. So we've seen a lot of new types of car sharing, I think, and new players. I also think there are other developments like that we didn't talk about many years ago, like mobility as a service, mobility hubs, or transportation hubs, as you like to call them. It's getting a more common theme. So you see that bigger cities do have car sharing policy where they wouldn't have had it many years ago. You see smaller municipalities getting interested in creating policy for car sharing. But also, I think, the questions are changing. How can we integrate car sharing in housing developments? How can we move to car sharing to zero emission, for example? How can we deal with competitors wanting the same location in the same street, for example? So I think the questions really changed. A lot of things remain the same, but some things also changed. How do you feel about that, Rebecca or Andrew?
Well, what I would also like to add to that is I think you mentioned very good topics, Ananda. Maybe I forgot to mention that I've been responsible for Greenwheels now for about 6.5 years, and in that time frame, that's my experience time frame. But in that time frame, Ananda, I hear you mention a lot of elements that changed, let's say, in the market, and also municipality based. But from customer perspective, I'm also noticing, or at least have noticed, that a much broader audience has opened up to the different modes of car sharing, and much more than in the past. And I think that's interesting to see. Obviously, and that's mentioned that we see that everybody has the wind in their sails, let's say, and it's not just because municipalities maybe have policies for that, or car sharing suppliers are able to lower their barriers of entry, but also really notice that the public or the customer is more willing to step away from owning a car and is able to try out different modes of transport.
That's really interesting. And since I haven't been an operator, I hadn't seen that, but I feel like that's got to be obviously true. That I feel like the gigantic boom and bust of shared bikes, the pain that the Uber and Lyft apps did, and I'd say that's why I co-founded NUMO, is I feel like all of these other pressures on the transport mode has created an urban discussion where people are now thinking, the status quo isn't the status quo. There's all these things pressuring in. I have to actually evaluate, why am I choosing what I'm choosing? So that is a really important difference between now and then.
Mm-hmm. I think from the city side, I definitely agree. What has changed here is, especially here in Bremen, where I live and work, is that we're no longer having these discussions about whether or not car sharing is a good idea, whether or not it has value. It's more about what locations are suitable, why aren't things developing faster? Why isn't there car sharing in like a single family home neighborhood far away from the city center? We want it now, kind of thing. But what has also changed, especially during the COVID crisis, is now that Bremen has been a city that has been promoting car sharing for a long time with our mobility hub since 2003, with our car share action plan since 2009. So it is a fundamental part of our integrated transport strategy. However, we've never subsidized or financially supported car sharing, only supported with policies and public awareness work. And now the COVID crisis came along, and a lot of the car share providers here saw an extreme drop in revenue, and all of a sudden our transport goals were jeopardized. We've been able to get so many privately owned cars off the street with car sharing, and it's such an important part of our policy to remove or to reduce car ownership, because our city is completely cluttered with cars. And all of a sudden there's this financial risk for a car share provider that we couldn't foresee, and if they fail, we fail. So we have to think about another different financing or promotional models to ensure that services that are here on the market can also stay in times of crisis, which I think is really interesting dialogue.
So, Rebecca, one of the things when you say that, it reminds me that in the early days of the pandemic, and this is so different country by country depending on their lockdown, yes, everything plummeted, everyone had to stay inside, and then different countries opened up in different ways. And when they started opening up, car sharing, as I understand it, and also BlaBlaCar ride sharing, that June of 2020, suddenly there was this huge demand because people were saying, oh, I'm not going to get on a crowded train and I'm not going to get in an airplane, so I'm going to go be in my car my car sharing car, in a vehicle with a very discrete number of people, and that was a pandemic related decision-making choice. And I thought, wow, it was so fascinating how the frame of reference for why you're choosing something can change dynamically over time. So,
but it's, in a way, it's kind of a blessing in disguise, because this discussion, or I think I mentioned about, car share stations in more peripheral neighborhoods, the idea of us as a city providing financial support for a private enterprise was a no-go thing, a year or two ago. Absolutely not. We cannot use taxpayer money to subsidize a private service, because we don't see car sharing as a public service yet. And now, just 2 weeks ago, I was in the city deposition meeting, and 2 political parties said we need to financially support car sharing so that it can stay alive and so that it can expand. And the same thing again this week in a district council meeting. Something that was really positive now, which if I would have said that at a meeting 2 or 3 years ago, even, I would have been laughed out of a session. Yeah.
In 2001 in Boston, Zipcar was declared a public good. And I was just like, oh my God, but I don't think there's no money associated with that. It was just a nice marketing piece.
But it does show us, I think, how even if a lot of things has changed and there are more operators, more types, a lot of things has changed, but it's still a fragile market. And where cities more and more start to depend on car sharing as a valid alternative for their multimodal trips, or for living a car-free lifestyle, it shows us how fragile the market still is. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And it also brings us to the essence of our discussion, really, because how can we bring this market that has been a niche for so long, and even if it's growing, to scale up and to really live up its potential?
Financial sustainability is one of our topics, but let's talk about it now, because I feel like this is important. From my perspective, I remember way back in 2002 in Washington, D.C., suddenly a company called Flexcar wanted to compete with us in Washington, D.C. And I thought, you have the entire United States. Why are you competing in Europe, where it's been existing? There hasn't been one single city back at this point where there's competition, and we need to have a critical mass. So I think when you're thinking about those small cities or cities, there is a critical mass density that's required to succeed, and you don't want to split it up among competitors. I think once you get enough demand, now we could start talking about introducing or enabling competition. So it's an interesting piece. And then I'll stop there, but I have another point to make.
But Andrew, I'm sure you have some thoughts about that too.
Yeah, I do. In essence, and then I'll get to answer your question, Robin. But in essence, I actually believe a car sharing provider should be able to break even or to be profitable by itself. That's my point. So no subsidies or and why I find that important, or at least for Greenwheels. So again, it's my opinion, is because for over 26 years. We've been trying to make cities a more nicer place to live. And we do so by taking cars off the street when we place cars on the street. And we want to do so for the next, I don't know, years. And to be able to fulfill our vision, we must make a profit so that we can continuously invest in making our proposition or our service more relevant to customers, to more and more customers. So, in essence, I think that should be possible, and that has to happen. And therefore, in the past, I've seen, some players entering the market and leaving the market pretty quickly on a totally different way of looking at that, and those elements or those moments, they disturb the market, and that's why I'm a bit hesitant when a marketing case driven company, that's how I call them, so not a business case driven company, but a marketing case company, kind of disturbs the market by not being able, by providing very low prices, as they don't need to make a profit anyway. And so that's how I look at financials for Greenwheels. However, I can obviously imagine that there are certain areas where municipalities or governments could help in help car sharing suppliers provide their service more efficiently. So if we, one example, in the Netherlands we have about another 380 municipalities, and they all have their own way of organizing stuff. And that means that a small company like Greenwheels has to organize itself to all these different ways, and that is very inefficient. That increases costs on our end. And you could also think of why would, if cities would really like a car sharing to be a part of their solution, why are parking permits so expensive, or as expensive as any other permit? So that's basically my point. In essence, I would say every company should be able to make a profit by itself. On the other hand, I believe we can also look at certain cost elements that could be beneficial for the customer. Yeah.
Can I add a piece in there, Andrew? Really made an important point. I felt that when I was doing Zipcar, there would be a geography or a building that would say, "Oh, put a car underneath my building," and I'd think, well, you might think that you'd like a car there, but I don't see demand there, so don't ask me to put a car there. Yeah. So what we did with universities, and then to Rebecca's point about suburban towns, perhaps, is with universities, we said, they'd say, "Come to our university," and we'd say, we don't know what the demand is, we don't know what the marketing that you're going to do is, so here's a monthly fee, you can pay us every month, but all revenues will apply to that fee, and when you hit this threshold, $600 a month or $800 a month that are covering our costs, then you wouldn't be paying anything, right? So all revenue on that vehicle. And I feel like that's a way that you can, if a place with a geography that is a poorly supported geography, and it's going to take great marketing efforts to make it work, that's a way that a city or a university or an office building or residential building that really wants car sharing, okay, if you're a real believer, you're going to pay the monthly costs, and then over time, if you help us make it work, you won't, it's going to take 6 months, it's going to take a year, well, then you will have it for free. It's a nice compromise, but your other point is really well taken.
In Germany, we call that the Flensburg model.
Yeah.
So there's this small city, small-ish city in Flensburg, all the way like right beneath the southern the border of Denmark, and up until 2015, they didn't have any car sharing, and they wanted car sharing. They thought, how can we attract a provider? And they did exactly that. They formed local partnerships, so the municipal government, the Chamber of Commerce, local banks, housing development agencies, and they said, look, if you put money in the pot and help us promote car sharing and provide or lower that financial risk for a provider to come, they will come. And they tendered, and it was one of the largest German providers that then said, well, we're interested. But the local stakeholders also had an interest in making sure the service worked. And like the local bank financed memberships, like to cover the membership fee for people. And exactly, the more they promoted it and the more it was used, the less subsidy that was required. And I think that's really important. Andrew, like you said, is that if there's subsidies or if there's like a kickstart financing, that it is temporary so that at some point these offers can carry themselves. Because I think those providers that are interested in being economical in the long run are ones that are interested in providing a service in the long run. I mean, you've seen plenty of startups come and go that have like received a subsidy for a short time, they pocket the money and then they disappear.
Yeah.
It means it has no impact on reducing car ownership.
Exactly.
Or they
not a
pocketed,
reliable service.
I mean, they pocketed the money, disappeared, but I would say also, as Andrew and those of us who've been in it, it's a really complicated business. Mm-hmm. And so it could be that they tried hard, but operations are challenging, the technology is challenging, the customer service is challenging. Yeah. You've got to be good at so many different things to make it work. Yeah. So I feel like I don't want to yell at the local co-ops and say, okay, you did a crummy job, but they did a crummy job. But it's very complicated. It's complicated.
You're right, and that wasn't how I meant it. It's more that because indeed it's a very complex business. So I know that it takes a while to organize yourself, but it's more that from I would say, maybe Rebecca, you would know, but from a municipality point of view or even governmental point of view, would you want to provide subsidies to new players, knowing it's so complex? One, and two, is that the solution? Because there's already so many other things you could do as a municipality or a government for the players that already exist to get the maximum benefit out of that. So it's also a focus.
Well, in a market where there's a succeeding car sharing company, they should definitely not be subsidizing.
Well, I tend to see that it is a very actual question, actually, and I think that you see that question being asked more often if we talk about what has changed. So you see smaller municipalities wondering how they can get car sharing to be an addition to their mobility, regional transport, for example. I also see cities who are thinking about, just not having an open market with lots of competitors in which they think nobody wins, but let's do a public transport concession, for example, or let's do a tender and let's have one operator that is really going to partner with us and really make it work in our city rather than opening up the market to everybody, for example. And I also think it's a question that we need to start answering in the coming years. And you see in some countries, they're already having successful integrations. I think in Belgium, they're doing the Flensburg model in a lot of smaller municipalities as well, where their biggest existing player is actually a partner in that. And it doesn't always have to be a subsidy. I think you can think about many ways of making it happen. And you see sometimes it's the municipality who uses the shared car for their own employee trips, for example. And outside office hours, the inhabitants of the city can use it. Or in a small village, the car is used also as a kind of like volunteer taxi service to bring elderly people to the hospital or to the nearby facility. So you can also, of course, make a deal maybe to say, okay, well, if you're not going to make this certain level, we're going to support you, but it's not a fixed support, for example. I mean, there's many ways to think about it. But one interesting one, I think, and I'm interested to hear your opinion about what if, because I don't know how it works in other countries, but in the Netherlands, we have regions that have their own public transport system and they do 10-year tenders, let's say, we call them concessions. What if they would add car sharing into their concession?
Just as you say that, the thing that I wanted to talk about was the duration of those government subsidies, wherever they might be happening. And I'm actually wanting to add in parking as well, is that in result to tenders, it could be that a competitor or an upstart has, I want to say overtly, lied. They've made these promises that they'll never keep, and they know they'll never keep it. And the person who's reading that thing doesn't know enough about car sharing to know, yeah, what they promised is totally never going to happen. And so I think about, and then I think about how long do we want to let monopolies exist? And 10 years, given the pace of technical change potential, is like way, way, way too long. And so a place where I've seen, so I want to take it down from giving a whole city to one guy for 10 years to, there's the whole issue of on-street parking or parking in municipal garages. That is an enormous cost for car sharing vehicles that residents are often getting for free. And then how do we compete with your free personal parking, but we get on-street parking as well? And so my advice for years to cities has been, don't do a one company take it all tender. Do a location by location. How much money would you give me per month for this spot? And it could be there's no competition in town. I'm a startup. I'm going to say I'm going to give you $0 per spot or zero money per spot because there's no competition, and that's what my fledgling thing is going to afford. Or you could be Greenwheels and Zipcar and say, oh, I know really well that this location, the parking prices are high, and I really want it because that's my best user spot. And so I want a high price, but this place in this neighborhood where it's not going to be great, you know, it's not high enough density, I would give you another spot. And so it would be like an auction, a per parking spot auction method that you would do annually, perhaps. But to do lock-in with one provider gives me anxiety because it doesn't mean that the best person wins.
So, like, that's where our different perspectives come into play. I represent a city government, and you are coming from the provider, sort of private sector thing. And we have a completely different view on this, and also completely different responsibility. In Bremen, we, first of all, maybe we can note it for another question. Are monopolies such a bad thing? If the monopolist does not use it to skew their pricing models. Maybe we can talk about that in a section in a minute. But I think so. In Bremen, we tender in packages, kind of like neighborhoods or packages. I know the city of Brussels does this as well. Operators who want really highly attractive site in the city center, they also have to operate, you know, some spots further away from the city center to get that. But for a car sharing service to be really attractive, it has to have good network coverage. The distance to the next station has to be short, and a vehicle has to be available when a user wants it, where they want it. So that means, and that speaks for a monopoly, essentially, is because you have better coverage.
But that depends, as we talked about. That is true when you have an untested or small market or small city. If you have New York City or Amsterdam, I think you can provide pervasive, you know, great coverage and still succeed. But so it really depends on what kind of market we're talking about. Well,
for example, Bremen has 570,000 people, so a little bit smaller than Amsterdam, of course, not as big as New York. We're a long city, but we're a bikeable city. We have 3 providers, but one who's been here quite successfully in the market for 30 years, and they provide, you know, a good and reliable service. Our job as a city is to provide, to offer equal access to the market. So, I mean, any provider can come to the city and rent spaces on private property. Our jurisdiction is for the public realm. And for the public realm, we have to ensure that we treat everybody the same. That means if they're, you know, if we charge fees, and we do for the parking space, they have to be the same for all providers. If we say, you know, it goes to the highest bidder,
But I'm not saying.
So that excludes like the
But
startup.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying it goes to the highest bidder per parking space. So it's not. It's just like downtown apartment rents. Depending on where your apartment is located, the value of that apartment is different. And so too, parking spaces are geography specific. So I'm not suggesting that you would charge side by side in the parking lot, you would charge one operator a different price than the other operator. I'm saying that in that specific location, what is the value of the parking space?
No, that is what we have. Like the fee that a provider pays in city center places is higher than in peripheral areas. So we have it, based on zones. Higher risk areas, higher financial risk areas for provider means they pay less. I would just say how I understood you, and it sounded like you auction off the spaces, and whoever has the most money to offer gets
per
that.
space.
But that also means that like a startup or a smaller company, which we as a city have the obligation to also give a chance to, it means they wouldn't be able to bid that high because they're not backed with that much revenue. Or are the others? Are Andrew, Ananda?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I think, something to think about. What are the different goals, right? I mean, as a government, whether it's a municipality or a country government, you have your societal goals and equal access to the market, but also equal access for users to look after. And it doesn't always align with a commercial interest, let's say. I can imagine, that if you make it into like a financial lottery, you get a little bit what happens a lot in tenders in general, like the highest economical interesting offer or something like that. I don't know how you translate that in English. You could also think about the highest offer or the best offer in value, for example. It doesn't. I don't think it needs to be money. I mean, obviously, one zone is more expensive than another zone. But you could also tender locations by seeing who has, the best offer overall, the best value, always available, different types of cars, easy access for their users, attractive prices for users. You can think about zero emission. You can think about a whole list of things that you could throw into the mix rather than just price, I think.
I think it's coming back to this initial question, which was, do we support monopolies for car sharing? What is the pain of having a monopoly or not? What are the positives and negatives? And I guess I would answer first off, some places are just so small, I would definitely have a monopoly. Like, you need a monopoly. Other places are larger and you don't need a monopoly. And so you wouldn't, how do you break?
It's interesting, Robin, when you say so. I can relate a bit to what you mean, that it depends on the location. In the Netherlands, I see the Netherlands as one city. So it's not different. Obviously, you have rural areas where you might have less impact than you can have in cities. In Germany, that's a bit different. There are really city-specific strategies. But in general, I would say competition is really good. I've always said it's really good, and that's why I enjoy this time as well, that there's more of them around. Why? Not so much from a, not an answer from a governmental point of view or city point of view, but it is a bit related to the financial part. Why? In the Netherlands and Germany, it's still quite a young market, or as Ananda said, it's a niche still, very much a niche, even though it's growing. And we need more players to have a louder voice in educating the market about, the benefits car sharing has. Yeah, doing that, if Greenwheels would have to do that by themselves with the limited marketing budget we have, our impact would be less. So from that point of view, our competition is not another car sharing company. Our competition is obviously the car that's owned and is taking up space in the street. And together we are able to actually have a louder voice and be able to make car sharing more aware, because it's still pretty difficult to explain to a lot of people. I think the people in this call kind of know what it is, but there's a long way to go. So in that sense, I really encourage competition for that sense. Yeah.
But I think we all know some examples, and you mentioned a few, Andrew, of companies that do it more for marketing or, you know, for other darkish reasons. We've seen some examples recently, and these cars, they're just taking up public space and standing around. And
Yes.
what happens, and that's actually a shame, is that people who live around these places and never see the car moved from its place,
Yeah.
they start to complain because this car is taking up valuable space. And we have a high parking pressure in this area already, and it's never moving from its place. So why are you giving out places to people who are not active players or what have you? And it's very difficult, I think, for cities to decide who is a valid player and who's not a valid player, of course. So, I mean, yes, competition and making a fist together really to make this niche grow, I do believe in it. But at the same time, I don't think competition is always beneficial.
But the answer for me, so first off, Rebecca, do you want to reveal those other two polls? And Ananda, the answer to that question of this car's never moved, for me, is why we should not have 10-year tenders. Have a 1-year tender, and if they can't get it to move some percentage threshold, don't let it sit there for the next 9 years, right? It's so I feel like a tender duration is a way that enables cities, if they chose wrong, to re-choose.
Yeah.
Because not all car sharing companies are alike.
I think if I would like to pick that up, and then afterwards, Dirk-Jan, I'll answer your question in the chat. Well, maybe I'll start with that actually. Dirk-Jan asks how I look at the competition with Snapcar or other peer-to-peer players, and I think that's an interesting question. I get that a lot. That's also why I answer that I don't see competition as competition, but there's even a distinction. What is competition? Because real competition for what we do, station-based car sharing, is another station-based car sharing player. Because that basically offers the same thing for a customer that uses that service the same way, the same use case. Peer-to-peer in that sense is usually a different use case, longer trips or longer day rental compared to, on average, a Greenwheels trip in the Netherlands is, let's say, 5 to 6 hours rent and about 50 or 60 kilometers drive. So I would not, again, also in that sense, do not see peer-to-peer as a competition. It might how do you say, enhance each other. And then I wanted to come back to something you ended with, Robin, but I just missed it. I can't recall what I wanted to say. So maybe never mind.
Maybe it'll come back to you.
Yeah.
I can just plug one thing about this. The subsidies.
Oh yeah, sorry. I know it, Rebecca. Sorry, it came back to me really quick. It wasn't what Robin said, but it was what Ananda said. You're totally true about taking up spots not being used, etc. But that's why I enforce also, since the Green Deal in the Netherlands, when years ago, that we share our data, so that also municipalities can see for themselves if it actually makes sense to have a car there or not. And if it doesn't, you can actually link that to parking permits or allowed to. Then
Andrew, you're not worried about your competitors knowing which are your best spots?
No, I'm saying I'm sharing data with municipalities. I wasn't sharing data with competition.
And you've told the municipality not to release it?
Well, I mean, if they use it to base their policy choices on, so that they can see what the effect is of the different modes of car sharing, I fully support that. Yeah. Because we have to prove it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, we are at the same level as car ownership, and we're just taking up space in the street.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important aspect to us as a municipality. It's important, and it's also a requirement for car share providers who want to use the public space to give us data to answer our questions when we have them. Obviously, depending on the sensitivity of that data, we share it or do not share it. We have a really open dialogue with the providers. That's really important to say, and it's okay for a provider to say, we don't want you to publish this, but like we need information on, you know, where is the highest demand, so that we can also help find that coverage. Is also, I'm going toward a question asked by Hannah in the chat of what role do local governments have in creating good coverage. That is one, if we want to provide public spaces, for instance, to close gaps in the network, or to provide additional space to car share providers in high demand areas where they just simply cannot find more spaces on private property to rent, we need to know where's the highest demand from the view of the provider, and that we rely on the data we get from the provider. We also want to know what kind of impact the car sharing is having on car ownership. That's our whole motivation as a municipality to support car sharing, is because it helps us get rid of all this metal that just sits around in the streets.
Rebecca,
and therefore we need data from them as well.
Just as you say that, I want to encourage people to go take the polls, some of you have, which is, why do cities want car sharing and why do users want car sharing? And what Rebecca just said is different from the 6 people who have answered the poll.
Yeah.
But please go to that poll so we can look at it and discuss those differences between what a city wants and what a user wants. And
I think unfortunately there's not a option to put in multiple answers for the poll, because I think there are a lot of things that car sharing can do for the city, and that the city can do for car sharing. But yeah, the role that cities and governments have for providing or creating good coverage is one of those things, providing public street space for the purpose of car sharing, because there is a public added value and therefore justification to provide public street space, whether it be at a small fee or for free.
But it also, I think, didn't help, right? I mean, if we talk about what has changed in the previous years, that we had seen like bad examples landing everywhere from bike sharing, for example, in which the user and their private data was the business case and not really the money paid to the ride. So it hasn't really helped, I think, with the faith that people have into what the actual reasons are for operators to start offering car sharing. I mean, we know a little bit that it's very unlikely probably to happen with cars. But having said that, in Russia, I think that the local Google just dropped 5,000 shared cars over one summer in the city of Moscow, and that was it. And obviously, I think public governments are very scared for this scenario. So that's another societal responsibility, I think, that municipalities have to filter who's getting into their cities.
Yeah, I think it's a good comment that Daniela has also made in the chat, or a question, that providers coming and going, and that there's no certainty, or that certainty can scare people off. And we did some research in Bremen a few years ago about obviously the impact of car sharing on car ownership, but we also asked the users, what would you do if the service disappeared? And more than 80% said we would buy a car. And that would be tragic, because we've just made some impact. We're just getting to where the number of cars in the city is not growing. We're still not even at that point of reducing the number of cars in the city. That would be absolutely tragic. So as a municipality, we have this fundamental interest in only working with providers that are in it for the long run. And if that means that car sharing grows more slowly than perhaps some stakeholders want, then so be it. If those providers say they are careful in developing the market, they don't just rush at every opportunity, but they say they only rush at opportunities where they know it will work, and so that they stay.
Yeah.
I'm suddenly in the last week getting more angry at what we all accept as the status quo, and you just played right into it, which is to say, oh, private car ownership has stayed flat in our city and car sharing has grown a little bit. That we continue, as all of us, every single place you are in society, to imagine that private car ownership is the status quo, and we won't challenge them very much. We won't ask them the same things. We won't say, you are the useless use of our car, of our curbs and sidewalks. You're the ones who are filling it all. You are, like, we continue to we ask these questions of every new mobility there is, and we never ask that question of personal car ownership. That is never questioned.
Yeah, I think this term of subsidies has such a bad rap, and subsidies for car sharing, and we forget that the most highly subsidized form of transport is private car ownership.
Which leads me to just mention the shared mobility principles.org, and one of the principles is fair user fees across all modes. So while I want to say I hate cars, I'm willing to say let's treat everyone the same. So when you give that car free parking, why are you charging? Or the example I was using was in San Francisco, if you double parked, it was a $100 ticket. And if you left an electric scooter, the kick scooters on a sidewalk, that was a $500 ticket. And I just think,
it's the same with the question that hasn't changed over the years, right? It's like I think the most frequently asked question that I get, and you can almost put the clock until somebody's going to ask that, is like, doesn't car sharing cannibalize on public transport? And then I think, well, yes, all car usage cannibalizes on public transport, but nobody seems to ask questions to those people that drive up and down to the letterbox like 200 meters away 20 times a day. But people do ask questions about somebody who's making a trip once a month, which is only 10 kilometers or 5 or what have you,
Ananda, that was my big irritation. And I felt like, oh my God, I don't want to see one more piece of research that asks electric scooters, bicycle, dockless bikes, shared bikes, what would you do if this didn't exist? And then say, oh, it's cannibalizing transit. And I think, oh my God, ask the private car owners I used to work in public health as the control group. What's the control group? Car ownership.
Another one in that sense, Robin, is electrification. I mean, obviously, the best thing is to have a car sharing car park that has zero emission, because that way you can have the maximum impact on livability in cities. However, as we already mentioned in the beginning, the business case is pretty thin for car sharing providers. At the same time, we said it's also a very, very little niche still compared to the rest of, but in the Netherlands, we are saying car sharing providers need to be electric by a certain state. Don't get me wrong, I think that's right. We need to be and become electric, so don't get me wrong about that. But it is something that the car sharing providers are looked at, while the whole problem still is that cars are on the street that are not electric.
So Andrew, I'm right this second, in the last 2 days, I've been talking to some staff of senators in the US on this exact point. So my question is the Netherlands subsidizing rebates on the cost to transition to buy an EV? Like, do they say you get some euros off?
Yeah.
If they are doing that, they should absolutely not do that, because that's another subsidy to personal car ownership. Right. And the first place they should give those subsidies is to the most intensively used vehicles, so they get the most CO2 reductions per money spent, which would be the car sharing companies, but also all the public transit, buses, taxis.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
But hey,
looking at our clock,
it brings us to the main question, I think, of this panel is what do we need to scale up car sharing? So let's have some thoughts around that and spin some ideas around. Yeah. Is there a golden bullet?
Definitely not.
But there is a sacred cow. There's no golden bullet, but there's the sacred cow that we just discussed. The sacred cow is right now private car ownership. And coming back to what ways can cities really help car sharing work? It's to, at each and every moment, think about what subsidies they're offering personal car ownership and reducing those. So are people paying market rates for parking? Probably not. Start raising the parking rates. Are people allowed to, park on street? reduce that? Are people getting the right amount of lanes for personal cars versus other modes of mobility? No, cars are getting more lanes than they deserve for a multimodal lifestyle.
But it's,
Yeah, I totally agree.
it's a very political hot topic, I think, and what I don't know how it is in the US or in Bremen, but I guess it's the same everywhere.
Yeah.
So what happens when a city raises parking fees, for example? You see like headlines in the newspaper saying bullying cars, you know. So it's so much the status quo that we almost take it, well, not almost, without almost, we take it for granted, and it's very difficult to do something about that. And second, what I do think is interesting, an addition, although I completely agree that maybe the most effective measure to scale up car sharing is, you know, reducing the attractiveness or nearbyness of private car ownership. At the same time, I don't think that car sharing in that is a goal on its own, right? It's not like, you know, sometimes you hear like we need to do something about private cars in order to make car sharing succeed. I think it's the other way around. A city has like sustainability goals and they want to enable a car free or a car low distance, and car sharing together with all these other options like public transport and bike sharing and micromobility, they offer an alternative to still enable their citizens to be mobile. And we should be, I think, a little bit careful with that frame, because sometimes it's interpreted in the wrong way, if you know what I mean.
In my opinion, it takes two to tango in that sense. So if you ask me as a car sharing provider, what would help further scale our business? The one can't go without the other. And what I mean by that is that the governments or municipalities will have to push people away of car ownership in one way or another, that it becomes less attractive. But on the other hand, obviously car sharing providers need to be convenient. It needs to be the best alternative to car ownership. Otherwise, the step towards something else becomes too big. So and that's where that investment need comes from. Companies need to be able to continuously invest in lowering those barriers of entry and making it, you know, more convenient, or you're closer by, or you have a better user experience in the app. Your service is up, right? You have clean cars, you have whatever. But at the same time, flankerend beleid, as we say in Dutch, is also necessary to then really scale it. Otherwise, we won't change quick enough, I would say, and we need to kind of have a game changer, or have a push in that direction. So I agree with what you say, Ananda, but I do think something is needed in that area.
But for sure, I agree with that 100%. And I also think as a country government, it's looking at how municipalities deal with car sharing, for example. And it's almost strange to think that in one country, the policy in all these municipalities is very different, you know, and that as an operator, you need to go to all these 318 municipalities and have multiple conversations with them and show them proof and research and your VAT registrations, and, you know, you go over the whole thing again and again. Likewise for municipalities, I don't think, especially smaller municipalities, they don't have the bandwidth or, you know, the knowledge to really dive into car sharing. So I think, and that's what we're working at, how can we harmonize and how can we standardize certain things so that it's the same everywhere in the Netherlands, and hopefully, you know, even outside the Netherlands. How can we, you know, a lot of topics, but I mean, one of them Rebecca mentioned, like data sharing. I mean, if all 318 municipalities are going to ask you, Andrew,
something different
twice a year, once a year, one day we need to know these 5 things, the other one we need to know these 25 things, the other one says bring it to me in Excel, the other one says, well, we have like actually built an API to gather like data into a dashboard. So why not make like a
car
joint
sharing association?
So there's a lot of things like that I plug into from a city perspective. But I also work in a European project called Share North, and we project partners come across the same thing, that one of the essential things for scaling up car sharing is to deal with still the fundamental lack of knowledge of some municipal employee stakeholders and planners about car sharing. Before we got together, we kind of talked about our pet peeves, kind of questions that keep coming up, and we think, okay, I feel like a broken record. Like questions like, well, isn't free floating car sharing much better than station based or more attractive? And what that shows is that there's just such a low level of understanding that there are different forms of car sharing with different levels of impact. So depending on what you want to achieve, it's, there's the different form of car sharing that's right for that fit. So like this basic capacity and knowledge building about what is not just, everybody's heard of car sharing in the meantime, but how does it actually work, and how do users use it, and what are user needs? And I think we see in the poll questions, obviously it's possible to, for the city perspective, what's important, one could tick all of the above. But I think the participants quite clearly shows that more efficient use of space, less parking. So there's very clear tendency from the participants here today, as far as the city perspective, but the user perspective also varies, and it shows that the user perspective is different. And I think that's what public officials and cities also have to understand, that their motivation and understanding of car sharing is different than the user motivation, and they need to understand that, and also understand how the market works in order to scale it up. So just understanding user needs, and that there are different priorities with these users. And Robin, one last point, if I could make, is something that Andrew also mentioned, is that in order to scale up car sharing, cities should not expect the perfect solution right from the beginning. The into 100% electric fleet, and it's also because car sharing in itself has such a huge impact on reducing emissions and saving space. It doesn't have to be 100% electric. Actually, 100% electric can also be a deterrent for users because of that skepticism. Can I reach my destination and come back without having to charge? Can I charge at my destination? How does it work? I mean, we're with asking for the perfect solution from providers right away, we're actually like putting more barriers in front of users, because we're asking for two major behavioral changes, going from owning a car to sharing one, and then conventionally fueled to electric, and all that uncertainty that still comes with some users, and that needs to be taken seriously. So like in Bremen, we would not expect a provider to be 100% electric. Obviously, we like to see that they're working on electrifying their fleet, but we also accept that the market and the user demand is going to drive that, because what's most important to us is car sharing. And
Rebecca, when you say that, I remember in 2003, I was speaking at the School of Environment at Yale, and there were probably an audience of 300, and I was saying, oh yeah, Zipcar is so environmental, it's reducing vehicle miles traveled and emissions. And this person said, stood up and said, you're a liar, you're not, all your cars are not electric. And then my response to that was just what you're saying. If the reduction in CO2 emissions is so dramatically caused by not owning a car that outweighs every other possible thing. If I can get you to sell your car and pay full cost each time you use it, that's where I get the reduction, not whether it's electric or not. That said, like Andrew is saying, I think governments should subsidize for car sharing companies. For intensively used vehicles, they could purchase as many electric vehicles as they want. And the beauty of car sharing versus car ownership is a diverse fleet. And so I'm going to have some cars that will be used for those crazy trips, whatever. I want to just change the subject for a little bit, because I'm realizing I'm talking to 3 Dutch people. Oh my God. So here's the story, because we're getting to this. I always talk about the Dutch as the best in the world for having created bicycle infrastructure and for having bike mode share. And when I say it all the time. And then maybe 3 weeks ago, I was on a panel and this person said, oh, but Robin, have you looked at the VKTs of the Dutch versus every other European country? And I'm not going to share my screen now, but I'll be using this in my talk tomorrow. Oh my God, you guys are just middle of the pack. You do not have a reduced VKT per capita. And so when we're talking about, oh, what should cities do to improve, what are city goals? Our goals need to be reducing CO2 emissions, and we need to go after that thing that we don't want to go after, which is we need to, here in your country, you have this spectacular multimodal ability. You have a fantastic train system, you have a lot of shared vehicles, you have these amazing bike lanes. I bet more people could live car independently in that country than any other country in the world, and yet we continue to go after cars. Why? Because personal car ownership is so darn easy and so convenient, and it is cheap, and we're rich. So we have to do more. We have to actually address constraining personal car ownership. We actually have to go straight after that if we don't all want to die from climate change. I feel like, let's just say it out loud. We have to go after that. Your country is the prime example. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I totally agree. I think it's in line with what I just mentioned. If we zoom in, you were mentioning a few elements of the Netherlands, but if we zoom in Rotterdam, where I'm now currently at, or where I live, I love the city. But just to give you an example, on this address, I could sign up unlimited amount of cars, or get a parking permit for unlimited amount of cars. And they're very, very cheap. Sorry, guys. Very, very cheap to get. So it's just an example. In Amsterdam, where I also lived for many years, you can only apply for one car. That is pretty expensive if you want that permit. And usually you have to wait quite a few years to get that permit. So that's why if I look at the Greenwheels business in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, you already see quite a huge difference in usage, because that's how the municipality of Rotterdam is actually still providing too easy use of owned cars. While they just launched a new policy that they want car sharing to grow, and there should be more cars, and actually and it needs to be electric, and all these kind of conditions, while they're not changing what is lighting up the change. So yeah, it's a very interesting moment.
Which is the car dominant culture, I think. And as a citizen of Amsterdam, I can just say that for me, owning a car would be just a block. It would be just a heavy load, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense. And people then always say, yes, but you have small kids. Yes, I do. And I do own a car seat. I used to own 2 car seats, but I don't own a car because it's just a hassle. You can't find a parking space. It's expensive. I have like a Greenwheels and my wheels and what have you in front of my door. They're even closer than my own car would even ever be.
Yeah.
So there is no point, right? And I bike everywhere.
Yeah.
Ananda, the cost of car ownership, and coming back to that question of how to scale up car sharing. I mean, environmental factors and finances do not drive our daily mobility decisions, mobility behavior. Otherwise, at least in like dense European environments, or East Coast USA or West Coast USA, people would not own a car, or not, at least not 2 or 3 cars, because of all those invisible costs. The cost of owning a car is between 300 and 500 euros a month, depending on the type of car you have. So it's an emotional decision factor. But I think one interesting aspect is maybe to provide more transparency about the cost, or what you can do with that money instead. One of the Share North project partners, Autodeel.net, so the Flemish Car Sharing Association, just developed a tool, savewithcarsharing.be, where users can really go through and calculate what it costs them based on their own personal mobility needs to own a car versus using car sharing. and there it comes across quite easily. And
So Rebecca,
it's one of those aspects, one of those many aspects of just more also of awareness raising. It's,
well,
you know,
I would say so. Zipcar did that in 2000 and 2001,
yeah.
and what I think we've learned, and then this Nobel Prize winning economist called Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and his point of that is all of us think fast. Like we never want to do the math.
Yeah.
And so you can have the spreadsheet, and I still don't want to do it. I don't want to go to a spreadsheet. So there's only these very specific points. Oh, my car had a car accident. Oh, I changed jobs. Oh, I had a baby. Oh, I moved apartments. That forces you. My car got into a car accident. That forces you into making the calculation. Other than that, you never make the calculation. And
well, yeah, I mean, I know on that transition period, also like getting rid of a car. Most people do that when they like a major repair or something like that, and then they switch completely to car sharing.
then they do the math.
But it has been surprisingly successful. I mean, they've had 30,000 hits since they published this calculation tool, which I didn't expect either, because I agree with you. I think, you know, and I said car use is not a rational one. We're not cost driven for car ownership. It's the idea we've been sold that it's freedom. I could if I wanted to, you know, and we're not aware of the cost. But perhaps there is some small shift happening, because I'm surprised how successful and how popular this tool has been. But it's obviously, like, I agree with you, it's not the only like driving factor. It's not the only thing required to scale up car sharing, but it is one part of changing the way we think about car ownership and about car use, and that can be one contributing factor.
I had one member said to me this interesting piece, and I thought, oh, that's such a good idea. She said, well, Robin, are you asking people to do the car challenge? And I said, well, what's the car challenge? And she said, I realized I was spending $600 a month on owning, depreciating, fueling, parking my own car. And I said, okay, I have a $600 a month personal transportation budget. Go without the personal car. And there's no way that I could spend that doing multimodal. Like, so she gave herself, so thinking about, and I know it's the same thing in Europe, it's about 6,000 euros a year on average to own and operate your own car. Say you have 500 euros a month. Are you actually going to spend 500 euros a month going around you could rent the car every weekend. You can rent it like whenever you're wanting, and you still wouldn't get to 500 euros.
Well, I think that's a difficult one, because people just don't think about depreciation, right? So, I mean, when you think about what your car uses, you just think about your monthly bills, and you get a whole different picture. And then there is, I think, the idea of missing out, you know, like if I really need that car because I need to drive my, you know, wife giving birth to the hospital or what have you, you know, I really need that car. And if there is no Greenwheels available, I'm in deep trouble. So I think it's also very much about trust. It's about convenience. And yes, it's also about price. But the difficult thing, of course, is in everything nowadays, when we talk about true pricing, is that you suddenly see the true price of your trip. And that shocks people because they think, oh, really? I mean, I make one trip and it's not even a whole day, and I'm going to chip in like 70, 80 euros easily, you know? And that's difficult, I think, for people to make that shift. Really, it does make people to think differently, but it's not a solution for everybody either. I think for those people who really need to drive to work every day because they work in some impossible place, it's just not a solution. You know, it's going to end up being far too expensive. And one thing I think to add is, whenever you look at mobility budgets, for example, I think it's a very tricky one, because like we had in the very beginning of mobile phone operators, you know, when in the end of the month you still have some minutes left, you're going to use it, right? Because otherwise you feel like, at least Dutch people are known for being cheap. So, I mean, maybe we live up to expectations. And you see that a little bit, I think, also in the mass solution in Helsinki.
And Ananda, you and I are best friends. What you're about to say, please.
Yes, I mean, you see, and also we did an experiment here in the Netherlands, and you just see that, you know, people at the end of the month, they make expensive taxi rides that are actually not needed just to finish up their budget. So maybe that's not the way to fly. But I do think that we mentioned some really important elements. That price is a very important one. Knowledge, you know, a lot of people don't even know how convenient car sharing still is, you know. how easy or difficult it is, how near it is, for example, from your own house, how difficult it is to park your own car in front of the house. So I think we've already nailed quite a lot of success formulas for scaling up.
Yeah, but so there's not one golden bullet. I think.
So we're at the last 10 minutes, and I'm thinking, audience, is there a question that you wish that we had answered? And all of us can be talking about how we want to close. And I have a good anecdote that I want to tell, but I'll save it. What do you guys want to? What are some parting comments that you want to cover? We had our big list. What do we not get to say that you wish you could?
Perhaps somebody even wants to come on screen and share their camera quickly and point.
Let me tell my anecdote, because I love this to your part about I have to have a car so I can have a baby. There was a Zipcar member. There was a Zipcar member who lived in Washington, D.C. and worked every day in New York City. And his wife was pregnant with twins. And he would take the train back and forth. And he was a Zipcar member in Washington, D.C. because he didn't have any children. And that was their car use in Washington, D.C. So he's in New York City at 10 p.m. And he gets this phone call from his wife. That says, oh my God, it's eight months, my water broke. I'm having these babies tonight, get home. So it's 10 p.m. and he looks at the train schedule. There are no trains after 10 p.m. The rental car companies are all closed. He is having absolute hysterics that he's going to miss this. And he thinks, oh my God, Zipcar also has cars in New York. I can use my same membership. And so he gets in the car, he drives like the Dickens. The babies are born at 3 a.m., his twins. And he got to see them because he had a Zipcar membership and not because of his personal car ownership.
Cool.
Yeah, or you get stuck in traffic jam with your own car trying to get home. You never know. But yes, it's an emotional thing. It's difficult to give
multimodal aspect
answers to emotional arguments.
Personal anecdote: a friend of mine who just had her baby last year, they took a car to the hospital.
Very good.
Last year, fun. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, maybe as a kind of a closing remark from my side, we touched upon indeed quite a few topics that might help scale up car sharing. If you ask me, I really personally believe we are on a good wave. If I look back, the times have changed. People are more aware, and so municipalities and governments are more aware of what's needed. We're finding each other better than in the past. And so I do believe we have traction at the moment to be able to push this even further on the one hand side, and on the other hand side, I also really see, as I already mentioned, that more and more people are willing and able to change their behavior and jump onto car sharing, let's say. So positive note from my side, I think it's going to scale further, maybe not as quick as we all would want, but we're not done yet.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that we're definitely on the right path, and there is a lot of traction. And only by seeing the amount of initiatives trying to get organizations to work together, it's exploding, really. So, I mean, we really are active trying to bring all these things together in possibly a national program around shared mobility for the whole of the Netherlands. And I really believe that if we bundle forces like public and private parties, we can make magic happen. And it will take time, I think, to sort out the differences and to, marry the public and the private goals together. But if we keep that dialogue open and we keep on working together towards the same end goal, I would say, then I really believe we can make it work. And I would also say, we're all mobility professionals, and we're talking about this expertise. But I would also invite all those people here today with us, if you haven't tried it before, try it, you know, and you will see, if you haven't done so yet, that it's easier than you probably think. You know, it's getting used to new things always takes a little bit of time, but I think we have almost a responsibility as mobility professionals to check it out, you know, and to see how it works from a user perspective. It enriches your view, I would say. So yes, have fun, try.
Ananda, when you say that, I when I'm in talking to audiences today, I say, have you tried an electric bike? If not, make sure you go try one. And I was thinking as we were talking that, you know, when you have a new visitor, a new resident come to the city, to give them, you know, a 1 month or a 1 week car sharing, you know, or 2 days or N hours or some wallet that includes car sharing. And I was just thinking that cities, we need to start promoting and storytelling and having narratives around a multimodal lifestyle and the benefits of that. And Bremen has done some fantastic media over its history of itself, of really hilarious. My favorite were the ones with the James Bond chasing people using shared cars, and public transit was way better than owning your own car to find the solution. But I guess my push right now, my feeling right now is I think we all know the answer. Like, we have been working at this for 30 years. Car sharing has been around really well. The technology to make things really simple and easy are there. If cities and countries were really honest about their CO2 goals and go very specifically into how they're going to reach those goals in transportation, the World Resources Institute and ITDP and the Rocky Mountain Institute have all just done these scenarios of the EV first push, electrification of vehicles first, and you cannot make your goals thinking that you're going to just give personal people cars, electric vehicles. Like, that is, we need to do mode shift. We need to get people out of personal car ownership. And so we need new narratives. We need to have new force and courage for cities to really, I mean, the best thing you can do for car sharing is making car ownership harder, period. Like, that's the answer. 3 more minutes. What else are we going to say?
Yeah. Well, my final thoughts, if I might, is simply, or maybe it's not so simple, but it's quite clear. I think that cities really need to get serious about car sharing, recognizing that car sharing has a public added value, just like public transport, that it requires support in that policy sides and urban development, you know, in housing developments, in communication work, like Robin said, tapping into situations when people are most receptive to new modes of transport, like if they're moving, if they're a new resident. So if they move to the city or they move within the city. Bremen has an example. We have this new citizen marketing where every resident that moves here gets a package and like trial packets for public transport, for car sharing, for bike sharing and e-scooters, because that's, you know, a significant time in somebody's life and when they're most likely to change their mobility patterns. So there needs to be a strategy for car sharing. Every single city needs one now, because it cannot, especially in cities where it's not established yet, kind of happen and work on its own. The city needs to you know, take an interest and also invest in it, you know, in a strategic and a financial way. And we always say, like, every sustainable urban mobility plan, as every SUMP needs a SMAP, a shared mobility action plan. And car sharing needs to be one of those, because car sharing is a pillar of sustainable transport, right alongside with public transport, walking and cycling.
It's part of the multimodal plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Andrew, did you have anything you wanted to say, or I'm looking at the time?
No, I already mentioned my closing remark. I hope everybody gave some insight into what elements are there to scale up car sharing. But yeah, we can't talk to you, so I don't know what what you thought of it. But otherwise, have a very good evening. Enjoy the rest of Urbanism Next, I would say, and go out and enjoy the sun.
And know where to find us if you have any questions after this session.
Yeah. Bye. That was great. And thank you, my dinner table conversationalists. Bye.
Cheers to that. Oh, my glasses.
Bye, everybody.
It's good. Thanks. Bye-bye.